I used to go to Rick James' house, and I used to go to Natalie Cole's house.
And that's
how I did it. I was very undercover.
Were arrested for tying up a female guest at their home, burning her roughly 20 times with a crack pipe and a heated butcher knife, and forcing her to take drugs and perform acts against her will. James and Hijazi reportedly imprisoned music exec Mary Sauger, who had known James for 6 years. Sauger said the couple slapped and choked her repeatedly over the course of 20 hours.
And that's how I did it. I was very undercover.
Nobody escaped, even myself, you know, and but the beauty is coming out on the other side, you know, because that was a wicked, wicked time, boy. That was a wicked, wicked time.
One of the best singers, one of the best looking motherfuckers you've ever seen. Hold my drink.
Chaka Khan seems to have confirmed a terrible secret about the one and only Rick James, and it's something many have speculated about, perhaps even anticipated.
They did not know that they were not eating meat, you know, for a long time.
Rick James was larger than life, the electrifying king of funk, known for his wild energy and unforgettable music. He was celebrated, admired, and always at the center of the action.
Listen, when I was a young boy, growing up in the ghetto.
But was there more to his story? Behind the fame and the legendary parties, was there a darker reality that remained hidden?
Now, when you're yourself and when you're not performing, what do you do? Where do you live?
I live upstate in Buffalo, New York, outside of Buffalo. And have a ranch.
Why did Rick's life seem to spiral so chaotically, despite his success and charisma? And what exactly did Chaka Khan reveal that has everyone buzzing? Let's find out. Chaka Khan recently shared new details about her time with Rick James, shedding light on a side of his life that was rarely discussed. In a recent interview, she reflected on the experiences they had together, offering insight into the environment that surrounded many artists during that era. She recalled that, at the height of their careers, Oakland was known as a major hub for drug distribution, attracting well-known musicians. According to Chaka, artists such as Charlie Wilson and Rick James frequently visited the area to obtain substances. However, what stood out most was her admission that she had spent time at Rick James's home and had personally witnessed the extent of his involvement in that lifestyle.
I used to go to Rick James' house, and I used to go to Natalie Cole's house.
And that's
how I did it. I was very undercover.
While some public figures struggled with substance use in a highly visible manner, Chaka stated that she never allowed it to reach that point for herself. However, she acknowledged that during that time, nearly everyone in the industry was affected in some way, and many did not escape unscathed. Rick James, in particular, was heavily immersed in that world. His struggles with addiction were well known, but Chaka's account adds another perspective to his story. She described that period in her life as a wicked, wicked time, and given the challenges Rick James faced throughout his career, her words serve as a sobering reflection on the era. One of the more surprising details she shared was that, despite the widespread substance use, she never felt that it affected her vocal ability.
How did I manage to get all that music done and get so up in the same time?
But can the same be said for Rick? Rick James's death in 2004 was ruled as heart failure, but the toxicology report revealed something even darker. He had at least 9 different drugs in his system when he died. So when Chaka says nobody escaped that era, she means it. But Rick James's story didn't start with fame and excess. It began with struggle, rebellion, and a deep passion for music.
We were 11 months apart, so we did everything together. My mother dressed us alike.
Before he became the king of punk funk, James Ambrose Johnson Jr. was just a kid from Buffalo, New York, navigating a rough childhood that would shape the rest of his life. Rick James wasn't always the wild, untouchable superstar people came to know. Before the fame, the parties, and the unforgettable music, he was just James Ambrose Johnson Jr., a kid from Buffalo, New York, trying to escape his problems. Most teenagers go through rebellious phases, sneaking out, blasting music too loud, or talking back to their parents. But for James, his teenage years were a little more extreme. His mother, Mabel Gladden, was a professional dancer for Katherine Dunham. But to make ends meet, she also worked as a numbers runner. This meant young James was exposed to both the glitz of show business and the dangerous side of the streets at an early age. While he got to witness jazz legends like John Coltrane, Etta James, and Miles Davis up close, he also saw crime, hustlers, and the harsh realities of survival. That wasn't the only thing he experienced too soon. In his autobiography, Glow, Rick claimed he lost his virginity at just 9 or 10 years old to a 14-year-old girl in his neighborhood. He later said, "My kinky nature came in early." This became a major theme in his music and personal life, shaping his persona as the self-proclaimed king of punk funk. But before Rick James became a household name, he had a complicated journey, one that included a stint in the military, a rock band with Neil Young, and a drug addiction that would haunt him for the rest of his life. At just 15 years old, Rick wanted nothing to do with the Vietnam War, so he did what many young men did. He lied about his age and joined the Naval Reserve, hoping to avoid being drafted. But military life wasn't for him. He hated the rules, the discipline, and, most of all, being told what to do. So he just stopped showing up. Instead, he spent his time playing drums with jazz bands, experimenting with drugs, and living life on his own terms.
Rick always had an interest in music.
He was always banging on glasses with spoons and stuff. He couldn't stop moving. He was always trying to express what was inside him.
By 1964, the Navy had enough of his disappearing act. They placed him on active duty, but Rick wasn't about to stick around. In true Rick James fashion, he told the draft board to kiss his ashy black and fled to Toronto, Canada. That decision changed everything. Toronto in the mid-1960s was a hotspot for emerging talent, and Rick quickly found himself surrounded by some of the best. He crossed paths with future music legends like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young. They clicked instantly, forming a rock band called the Mina Birds. The group was so good that they caught the attention of Motown Records and landed a deal. It was during this time that Rick had a fateful meeting with Stevie Wonder. Stevie, impressed by his musical skills, asked for his name, not wanting to give away his real identity. Especially since he was still technically on the run from the US Navy, Rick blurted out a fake one, Ricky James Matthews. Stevie thought the name was too long and suggested he shorten it, and just like that, Rick James was born.
Well, Rick's stay in Canada was the real beginning of his career.
But just when things were looking up, Rick's past caught up with him. Since he was technically a fugitive from the US military, the Navy tracked him down, arrested him, and sent him to a military prison. Most people would have taken that as a sign to calm down, but not Rick. Once he got out, he was more determined than ever to make it big. And make it big, he did. Rick James became one of the most iconic names in funk music, bringing us hits that still get played at every party today. But let's be real, his wild lifestyle was just as legendary as his music. Fans of Chappelle's show will never forget those hilarious skits about his crazy adventures.
Come here, darkness.
One of the wildest stories involved none other than Mike Tyson and Alfonso Ribeiro, aka Carlton, from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. According to Tyson's memoir, Rick walked into a hotel one night, dapped up Tyson, looked at Ribeiro, and said, "Aren't you an actor?" Before anyone could respond, Rick straight up punched Ribeiro in the face and took his beer. Even Tyson, one of the toughest men in the world, was stunned. But Rick's journey wasn't just about partying and music. He had some dark times too. When he first joined the Navy, he was just 14 or 15 years old, already getting into trouble with drugs and stealing. He thought the military would straighten him out, but instead, he ended up being sent to Vietnam. What he saw there shook him to his core. The destruction, the violence, it was too much. That's when he decided to escape to Canada. His early days in Toronto weren't easy. He got jumped and beaten badly not long after arriving. Luckily, 3 men, including Levon Helm, came to his rescue, helped him up, and took him to a concert. That night changed everything for Rick. Seeing musicians perform made him realize he wanted to dedicate his life to music. After Canada, Rick made his way to Los Angeles, right into the heart of the counterculture movement. He started hanging out with rock legends, experimenting with different sounds, and even got his first acid trip from Jim Morrison himself. He was rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in music, but his journey to superstardom was just beginning. When it came to making music, Rick James wasn't about playing it safe. He was bold, unpredictable, and loved collaborating with the best in the game. And while working with icons always comes with a little drama, one thing was for sure: Rick James was here to leave a mark. Stevie Wonder was a huge inspiration for Rick. But he wasn't just someone Rick looked up to. He actually gave him advice that stuck. Stevie told him, "Forget the rules, make your own." And that's exactly what Rick did. He created a sound that was different from anything else out there, layered, funky, and futuristic. Those unique beats and wild grooves? You can thank Stevie for pushing him to think outside the box. And let's not forget Tina Marie. She wasn't just another duet partner, she was his creative soulmate. Rick found her at Motown, saw her potential, and the rest is history. Their duet, Fire and Desire? Absolute legend status. Behind the scenes, they pushed each other hard. Rick challenged her to go bigger and bolder, while Tina fired back with ideas that kept him on his toes. That spark between them? It showed every time they shared a stage or dropped a track together. Pure magic.
Finally today, pop singer Rick James is being accused of all kinds of terrible things, and authorities are taking it very seriously.
But while Rick was making music history, there were also dark moments in his past that couldn't be ignored. In 2020, a woman came forward with serious accusations against him, claiming he had a back in 1979, when she was just 15 years old. She filed a $50 million lawsuit, saying the attack happened while she was living in a group home. According to her, Rick was familiar with the people running the home and visited one night when the girls were finishing dinner. While the other girls were excited to see him, she says she didn't know who he was and left to go to her room. But moments later, she says Rick followed her, pinned her down, and she claimed he threatened her, telling her to stay quiet or he'd hurt her. The woman says the trauma haunted her for years. She struggled with alcohol and drugs, battled low self-esteem, and even had thoughts of suicide. She also suffered from panic attacks, nightmares, and flashbacks. In her lawsuit, she said, "This traumatic experience has caused me everlasting damage, and I would like to preserve my privacy in this matter."
And I'm talking about albums that sold millions of copies. Every album we did, we never failed to have an ounce or two sitting right there on the console.
Really?
A big bag of Quaaludes, okay? Cristal champagne and Jack Black bourbon, and all at our beck and command right there.
Rick James's early days in Los Angeles were just as chaotic as the rest of his life. On one of his first nights in the city, he was crashing on musician Stephen Stills' couch when he woke up to a shocking sight: a man sitting on the floor, bleeding from his wrists. Panicked, Rick ran to get help. It wasn't until later that he realized the man was Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Their paths crossed again when The Doors opened for Buffalo Springfield, and during one of their encounters, Morrison tricked Rick into trying acid for the first time. That moment would be the start of Rick's long and complicated relationship with drugs. While in California, Rick was working closely with bassist Greg Reeves. He introduced Greg to Neil Young, but it was Greg, not Rick, who ended up joining Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. That loss didn't slow Rick down. Instead, he pushed forward, forming his own rock band, Salt and Pepper. One of the most chilling moments of Rick's life came in 1969. His hairstylist friend, Jay Sebring, invited him to a party at actress Sharon Tate's house. Hungover and exhausted, Rick decided to skip it. The next morning, he woke up to the horrifying news that Jay and everyone at the party had been brutally by the Manson family. That close call stuck with him for years. By 1970, Rick was still chasing his music dreams, working with a band called Heaven and Earth, which later became Great White Cane. In 1972, they released an album, but Rick was always looking for something bigger. He formed another band, Hot Lips, and even collaborated with Toronto blues band McKenna Mendelssohn Mainline. During this time, he co-wrote a song called You Make the Magic, which was later recorded by the Chambers Brothers. By 1973, it was clear that Rick was meant to be a solo artist. He signed with A&M Records and released a song called My Mama, which became a hit in European clubs. After bouncing around different projects, he eventually returned to Buffalo and formed the Stone City Band. In 1977, Rick and his band landed a deal with Motown, the same label that had once signed him years before. This time, he was ready to take over. In April 1978, Rick released his debut solo album, Come Get It, introducing the world to his signature mix of funk, rock, and R&B. The album featured the hit song You and I, which shot to #1 on the R&B charts, along with the fan favorite Mary Jane. It sold over 1 million copies, making Rick an overnight star and giving Motown a much-needed boost at a time when the label was struggling.
And when I'm feeling low, she comes as no surprise.
With his signature braids, flashy outfits, and high-energy performances, Rick James was on his way to becoming one of the biggest funk artists of all time. But Rick didn't stop there. In early 1979, he dropped his second album, Bustin' Out of L7. Like the first one, it was a big success. It made it to the top 20 on the Billboard 200 and hit #2 on the R&B album charts. Later that year, he released his third album, Fire It Up. At the same time, Rick went on his first big tour, the Fire It Up Tour. He even invited rising stars like Prince and Tina Marie to perform as his opening acts. In 1980, Rick tried something different with his album Garden of Love. This one was more focused on love songs, but it didn't do as well. It only reached number 83 on the Billboard 200, but Rick didn't let that slow him down.
You kept me warm on tropic nights.
In 1981, Rick released his biggest album ever, Street Songs. This album mixed different styles like rock, funk, and new wave. It included hits like Ghetto Life, Fire and Desire, and the iconic Super Freak. The album was a massive success, selling over 4 million copies worldwide. Super Freak became one of his most famous songs, peaking at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. Following Street Songs, Rick released more gold-certified albums, including Throwin' Down in 1982 and Cold Blooded in 1983. During this time, Rick also helped other artists become successful. He created groups like the Mary Jane Girls, who had hits like All Night Long and In My House. He also worked with legends like The Temptations, Smokey Robinson, and even Eddie Murphy. Rick James wasn't just about music. He appeared on TV, including an episode of The A-Team, and continued making music throughout the 1980s. His 1988 album, Wonderful, included the hit song Lucy's Rap. While Rick was dominating the funk world, another artist was on the rise, Prince. On the surface, it seemed like the two had a lot in common. Both were flamboyant, boundary-pushing performers who brought funk and R&B to the mainstream in the late 1970s and early 80s. In fact, they even toured together in 1980 during Rick's Fire It Up tour. But despite their similarities, the two weren't friends. In fact, they had one of the most intense feuds in music history. Rick James never liked Prince. From the moment they shared a stage, Rick accused Prince of stealing his stage moves, turning their tour into what many fans later dubbed the Battle of Funk. In his autobiography, Glow, Rick recalled feeling that Prince was intentionally trying to upstage him. He also wasn't impressed by Prince's music, once telling Rolling Stone, "I can't believe people actually buy his records. You can't take his music seriously." Prince, on the other hand, wasn't exactly a fan of Rick James either. He refused to acknowledge James's criticisms and kept his distance. Their tension reached a boiling point in 1982 when Prince refused to sign an autograph for Rick's mother at an after-party. That single act ignited an all-out war between the two, solidifying their status as bitter rivals rather than allies in funk.
Street Songs, Rick James!
I would just like to thank, first of all, the creator who brought me here, and my mother who's sitting over there, who I give this award to.
The feud between Rick James and Prince reached its peak at the 1982 American Music Awards afterparty, and this time it got personal. Rick's mother, a huge Prince fan, approached him for an autograph. Instead of acknowledging her, Prince coldly turned his back and walked away. When James found out, he was livid. He stormed over, ready to confront Prince and throw hands. According to James, the situation nearly escalated into a full-blown fight. But Prince's manager quickly stepped in and urged Prince to apologize. Even after the apology, Rick was still seething. In his memoir, Glow, he admitted, "I really wanted to kick his ass." But the night didn't end there. Prince took things a step further in a way that hit James where it hurt. That same evening, Prince crossed paths with Rick's ex-girlfriend, Denise Matthews. Not only did he start dating her, but he also took her under his wing, transforming her into his musical protege under the stage name Vanity. For James, this wasn't just a coincidence, it was an outright betrayal. Furious, he began calling Prince a little B whenever he got the chance, according to Prince FAQ. Their rivalry wasn't just about music, it was deeply personal. From stolen stage moves to stolen girlfriends, the tension between them ran far deeper than professional competition. While they never physically fought, their animosity never faded, making their feud one of the most infamous in music history. After giving so much to the black artists and this industry overall, his health started to deteriorate. R&B and funk trailblazer Rick James reportedly passed away in his Los Angeles residence. One of his fans wrote, "I don't care what anyone says, he was a musical genius. He could play so many instruments, was an amazing producer, and was a great singer. It just sucks that his persona overshadows his immense talent." Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.